My name is Susan, and I had an affair with a man who worked at the same company. He lived just 5 miles away from us, and since we had the same commute and working hours, we started carpooling together. Sometimes Bud would pick me up, sometimes I would pick him up. I'm married to my wonderful husband, Andy, and we have 1 child. He knows Bud, of course, but he doesn't know about the affair. You might wonder why I had an affair when my husband was and still is wonderful. I can't fully understand it myself, but I'll try to describe what happened. After several months of carpooling and conversations about everything under the sun, even personal matters, we became close friends. We even started talking about our sex lives, and I think that's when we began to develop a sexual attraction to each other. Don't get me wrong. My life with Andy has been and continues to be wonderful. Welcome to the Dark Side channel. Dive into the world of human relationships, mistakes, and right decisions. Don't miss out. Subscribe and join our growing community. He's a handsome man, and I know women are attracted to him, even when he doesn't notice. He's polite and always helps out neighbors, as he's handy, despite working with computers at his job. Our sex life is great. We have sex several times a week. He is gifted above average and knows how to use it. He has great stamina, as he is able to restrain himself for a very long time just to satisfy me. But I digress from the topic. It wasn't about sexual frustration when Bud and I started having sex in the car while sharing. We would leave for work earlier or come home from work a little later just to have sex. On the way home, we would always head to one of the secluded spots in the woods. His wife had to leave for work early, so we even started having a quick fuck at his house when I picked him up. My husband often worked from home. Sometimes he had to stay overnight on a trip, but rarely did he spend 2 nights in a row out of town. During one of his overnight stays, Bud and I had sex at my house, but not in our bedroom, and he didn't stay the night. Sex with my husband had dwindled down to maybe once or twice a week, and it wasn't as intense and prolonged as it used to be. When I asked him, he told me that he was under a lot of stress at work, so I didn't think about it anymore. After about 6 months, it started to get complicated. During one of our sessions, Bud and I were yelling about our love for each other. This struck me, and we told each other that it was just sex, and we couldn't fall in love, since I had no intention of leaving my husband, and he had no intention of leaving his wife. But that didn't stop us from dating. It even intensified our sex and orgasms. Even though it was just sex at first, I knew I had fallen in love with Bud. It wasn't the same love I felt for my husband, but a true love nonetheless. Yes, I was in love with 2 men. My husband and Bud's wife knew about Bud's car rides with me, but certainly nothing about our sexual relationship. We even invited them over for barbecues from time to time. Toward the end of the affair, Bud and I even kissed and made out in the house when our spouses were out. One day we had a quick shag with them in the patio kitchen. A little over a year later, my husband told me that he had to go out of town for a week on business. When Bud found out, he asked to spend the whole night with me. This had never happened before, and after much pestering on his part, I agreed. We had an intense night and morning in our marital bed. But the next day was the first time I experienced real guilt over the affair. We talked and decided to end it, although Bud spent 2 more nights at my house in our bedroom. When Andy returned home from his trip, I never engaged in sex or any sexual relationship with Bad again. 2 months after that week, I realized I was pregnant, but I didn't know who the father of the child was. I informed Bad about the pregnancy, but not about the possibility of his paternity. We continued to ride together in the car, but about a year later, he moved to another job. Andy was a proud father, but I always felt that we didn't have the expected connection with our son, Donnie. He continued to care for him as a father should, always being there for him and teaching him his values. In the neighborhood, there was only one other child about Donnie's age. Julia was a year younger than Donnie. They became friends, and Andy often took them both to the playground and other places. I never saw her father and didn't know her mother very well, as we didn't get along. I got strange vibes from her every time we were together. Andy asked me for another child, but I was afraid that the second child would look completely different from the first, and I was afraid that he or someone else would realize that something was wrong. I wanted to wait a few more years so that the age difference could explain the difference in appearance. About 14 months ago, Our son was now 5 years old. Over the past few years, our sex life had reached new heights. What I had been holding back before, I simply let go of now. We even tried new things and were more adventurous. But everything changed 2 weeks ago. For the past few weeks, Andy had been very withdrawn and looked sad. I really wanted to know what was going on, but I was terrified of what he had found out about Donnie. I was on pins and needles, waiting for the hammer to drop. Then on Thursday, he told me that we would have a guest on Saturday, and we needed to discuss something important. He would take Donnie to his parents for the weekend so that we could talk without interruptions. I knew it. My world is crumbling. That's all I could think about. I fully expected divorce papers to come this weekend. But why did we need a guest? I was baffled. After lunch that Saturday, knowing that my life would change forever, I waited in the living room for the guest he had invited. I fully expected there to be staff, but I was surprised when Andy brought in Michelle, the mother of Julia, the little girl my son always played with. After a brief conversation, I sat down on the couch and fully expected Andy to sit next to me. I was taken aback when he sat on a chair next to Michelle, holding her hand. "What the hell?" That's all Michelle could think before she spoke. "Susan, I want to thank you for allowing me to discuss my problem with you." I became curious about where this was going. I think she saw the confusion on my face and continued, casting a quick glance at my husband. I could see her eyes misting over as she went on. "I'm sorry. It's still hard for me to talk about this, so I'll just say it. Susan, some time ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. Further tests over the past few weeks confirmed that it's in the advanced stage. I have about 6 months left to live. There's treatment that could extend my life to a year, maybe a few more months if I'm lucky. But in about a year and a half, I'll be dead." A quick glance at my husband didn't reflect any surprise on his face. "Michelle, I'm surprised but honored that you want me to be a mother to your child. But I don't understand why us. I would have thought you'd ask your parents or someone else from your family. What about the biological father? Whoever he may be, shouldn't he have a say in this?" Michelle looked at my husband, and after a few seconds he simply nodded. "I don't have any family left, Susan. And I'm sorry to bring it to your attention like this. Your husband is the biological father of my daughter, Julia." "What?" I just stared at them. It seemed like forever. Then all the tension of the past few days burst out. I don't know exactly what I yelled at them, but I called them a plethora of names. Among other things, I called her a homewrecker and him a cheating bastard. After a few minutes of ranting and cursing on my part, I looked at them. I expected to see guilt and shame on their faces, but all I saw was indifference on hers. Andy, on the other hand, was boiling with rage. But why? Michelle addressed my husband. "Dear, let me talk. Let us girls talk. Maybe you'll want to watch and listen from the kitchen." "Dear?" I thought. Turning to me, she continued, "Susan, let me tell you my story. It might provide answers to many questions. Both my husband and I were only children. Our parents passed away before we moved to this neighborhood. Though we were quite wealthy thanks to our inheritance, we fell in love with the house I live in and bought it. It took a bit of work, and we didn't need much luxury. Unfortunately, after we signed all the papers and before we could move in, my husband died in an accident caused by a drunk driver. Using the insurance payout and some of the money we inherited, I decided to stay in this house in memory of my husband. I could have lived a comfortable life without worrying about money. Soon I befriended most of the neighbors, although I knew some men were simply after my money, or trying to get into my pants, or both. I never flirted with any of them and never encouraged their advances. For minor repairs needed in my house, I could have hired professionals, but some neighbors offered to help. When we were alone, they all made lewd comments or sexual innuendos, except for one. He was always polite and never made any advances, so whenever I needed help, I called him. From now on, I'll refer to him as the gentleman. On the anniversary of my husband's death, I wanted to mark it at home alone. Unfortunately, on that very day in the afternoon, my dishwasher decided to stop working and started leaking water, so I called the gentleman. I forgot that I was wearing my late husband's favorite dress, a very revealing dress, I must admit. When the gentleman arrived, He complimented me, but he never looked at my body. He just looked into my eyes. Oh, I knew he was aroused. I could see it, but he was more embarrassed than I was. That's when I realized he was a gentleman, and his wife was very lucky. Living alone, I explored the surroundings because I always enjoy walking in the woods. During one of these trips, I stumbled upon a secluded spot in the forest with a parked car. At first, I just wanted to leave, but then I decided to conduct an investigation in case a crime like rape had occurred. What I saw was a woman and a man having sex. I knew the woman from our neighborhood, but the man wasn't her husband because her husband was the gentleman I really liked. I didn't know why she cheated on him, but after catching them 3 times in the same spot without them seeing me, I decided to inform the gentleman about it. When he came next time to help in the garden, I told him about it and even showed him a photo I took during one of their rendezvous. I helped him hire a private detective to monitor them and gather as much information about their affair as possible. He found out that it had started just a few weeks earlier, so we caught them quite early in the affair. The private detective gathered information about their liaisons in the car, at her home, and later even at the gentleman's house. After all the information the private detective gathered in the first few weeks, the gentleman decided to kick his wife to the curb and inform the lover's wife about their affair. It was the first time I saw him truly angry. That's when I made my first selfish decision. You see, the gentleman was the first man I could have a relationship with. My husband was a perfect match for me, and this gentleman was close to me, so I actually proposed to him to start an affair with me. It took a week of all my persuasion, but eventually our affair began. His wife didn't really care that their sex life was becoming less and less frequent, and when she started having sex, it was just like bam. Thank you, ma'am. At first, we always met at my house, but when his wife invited her lover to their house, we also started meeting at their house. What started as a sexual affair evolved into an emotional connection. We didn't just have sex, we also talked a lot about us. Eventually, it became a real love affair. He still loved his wife, and although her affair intensified too, he couldn't bring himself to divorce her. But about a year later, we talked about taking our relationship to the next level. We booked a 1-week cruise to see if we could build a future together. His wife didn't know about this cruise. She thought he was out of town for work. When we returned, we decided to plan a future together because we didn't see an end to his wife's affair. But then we saw footage from his house. Yes, the surveillance was still active. His wife spent 3 nights with her lover in their marital bed. But despite them once again professing their love to each other, they completely ended their affair. In the following weeks, I spent several times with the gentleman in their bed, but it seemed his wife really wanted to reconcile their marriage. We talked and decided to let our romance cool down and give his marriage a chance. A few weeks later, his wife informed him of her pregnancy. We both knew there was a good chance the child was from her lover. After the child was born, he secretly did a DNA test, which confirmed he wasn't the father. He was torn between divorcing his wife or staying in the marriage because his wife had really put effort into reviving their love-based marriage. That's when I made my second selfish decision. You see, when my husband and I bought this house, we wanted to fill it with children. This gentleman was the only man I could see as the father of my children, so I persuaded him to have a child with me. For the next 3 months, we met on my fertile days to make love, so that's how my daughter was conceived. After confirming my pregnancy, we never had sex again, but we remained close friends. I'm sure you've already guessed. The wonderful gentleman is your husband. She fell silent and looked into my eyes. I didn't realize I had started crying. I glanced at my husband and saw tears in his eyes too. I didn't know what to think. Michelle continued. I know it's not easy to process. Do you have any questions or would you like some time alone? I turned my head back to Michelle and suddenly anger surged through me again. My husband's mistress was talking to me in my own home and I felt humiliated. With all the calmness I could muster, I addressed them both. I need some time alone. Could you please just leave? Turning to my husband, I said, I'm not sure I can talk to you today. Could you leave until tomorrow? All right, I'll go to Michelle's place and stay there. If you don't call me today, I'll stay there until tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll stay in the guest bedroom. he finished, noticing my irritation. With these words, they left, and I remained alone to contemplate what I had learned that day. And then it finally hit me. My husband had known all along that I was cheating on him. He knew that I was regularly sleeping with Brad in the car, at his house, in our house, even in our bed before we ended the affair. I had always justified my infidelity with the lack of sex with my husband, but now I knew that the lack of sex was a result of my cheating. My anger turned into shame. I realized that I could have divorced now if Andy had chosen that path. And getting pregnant by Brad, I would have become a divorced mother. I cried all day and went to bed early. Lying in bed alone, I realized something else. Although I had always told myself that if something happened to our spouses, Brad and I could be together forever. I knew that if I had to choose between Andy and Brad, Andy would always come first. Brad having sex with his wife didn't bother me at all, but Andy having sex with Michelle hurt me. It wasn't just possessiveness, it was genuine love that I had ignored and taken for granted, not only during my affair, but even after it, until now. Feeling emotionally drained, I eventually fell asleep and woke up late in the morning. I felt rested and knew that I needed to make some decisions. First and foremost, I had to think about my marriage. Since Andy had stayed with me all these years, I had hope, but I also knew that we needed to rebuild it through long conversations. Perhaps we would need marriage counseling, but I was ready to fight for it. Then there was the unresolved situation with Julie. Due to my selfishness, I never knew how deep his relationship with her was, but I also knew that I would never intervene in it or force him to ignore her. Subconsciously, I had already decided to welcome Julie into our family, but I knew that I had to get to know her much better and build a friendly relationship with her on my own. I also knew that it wouldn't be easy. I also needed to think about Michelle. Remembering what I had seen the day before, it was clear that there was still love between them. Jealousy returned, but I believed everything they told me. I even trusted Andy to stay in the guest room at Michelle's house. I called Andy and asked them to come over to continue our conversation. I asked if they had already had breakfast, or if they wanted me to prepare something for all of us. They gladly agreed, but asked us to wait for them so we could prepare it together. We worked seamlessly in the kitchen, and I even accidentally caught a glimpse of them together. After a peaceful breakfast and clearing the table, I began to speak. Andy, I love you with all my heart, and I would like to apologize for what I've done to us. But I know that mere regret is not enough to make this marriage work. I want to fight for it and will do almost anything for it. None of us can just forget what happened, and I'm sure our marriage will never be the same as it was a few years ago. But I think with the help of marriage counseling, we can make it stronger. Then I turned to Michelle. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Michelle, I want to thank you for being there for Andy when I was such a miserable wife to him. And by that, I mean everything you did, even for Julie. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I continued. It would be an honor for me to take care of her, and I will do everything possible to be the best stepmother on earth. Of course, it depends on Andy and whether he still wants me to be his wife. I know that he will be the best father to her regardless, but I also know that he must build a relationship with Julie on his own. If you allow, I would like to visit you over the next few days to get to know her better. When I finished, Andy stood up, came over to me, and simply enveloped me in a hug. With those words, I couldn't hold back and leaned into him again. When we released each other, I looked at Michelle and blushed. She had tears on her face too, but when I saw her smile, I realized they were tears of happiness for us. Over the following weeks, I visited Michelle and Julie several times. Sometimes with Andy, sometimes alone. Julie was a well-behaved child, always polite and happy. Andy was always Uncle Andy to her, and a week later, I became Aunt Susan. Although I had loved Julie from the start, I had always felt some reservation towards her. Over these 2 weeks, I learned that Michelle had a degree in psychology, although she had never practiced. We talked a lot about the situation. She sensed my discomfort and asked me about it. When I told her about my feelings towards Julie, she said she completely understood and that I had the same issue as Andy did with our son. Here's what she explained. Even when we love children, our subconscious sees them as evidence of our spouse's infidelity. Julie is evidence of Andy's infidelity, and Donnie is evidence of my own. Andy initially had the same issues as me. According to her, his parents, who are actually his foster parents since he was a child, helped him deal with his feelings. Although they aren't his biological relatives, they made his education and career possible. But most importantly, they showed him that you can love your child even if they're not your biological offspring. It's not quite the same as dealing with infidelity, but it still helped. Andy had time to work through everything many years ago, and now he wholeheartedly loves Donnie. I still had to work through my feelings towards Julie and her conception. Many people would say that I should just accept Julie like any other child I'm planning to adopt, but Michelle told me that's just nonsense. Her words: when a man or woman meets a partner who has a child from a previous relationship, it's much easier for them to accept the child or children than when the child is conceived during a partnership with a third party. For understandable reasons, it's easier for a man to accept a child conceived from an anonymous donor through IVF than from another man during the partnership. I always had to remember how difficult it was for Andy to accept a child from a year-long affair. When this was explained, within a week all my resentment towards Julie disappeared. During this time, Andy and I also visited a marriage counselor who helped us restore our relationship into a loving and even trusting marriage. It was about 8 months ago when Michelle and Julia became an integral part of our home, and we visited each other several times a week. Donnie and Julia interacted as brother and sister. Of course, she had cancer. Michelle immediately began her treatment, but while initially the medication knocked her out for about a day, later it took several days for her to fully recover. On the tough days, Julia often stayed at our house. And then I sat down with Andy and Michelle and made a proposal. Michelle, you and Julia are now an important part of our family. I know it's tough for you for several days after each treatment, and I've seen that it's not easy for you the rest of the time either. I want to make a proposal. I haven't discussed this with Andy, but I'm almost certain he'll approve. I would like you and Julia to move in with us permanently. Michelle, you can move into our guest bedroom, and I'm sure Donnie will have no problem sharing his room with Julia. We'll need to convert his bedroom and make space for Julia's bed, but there's plenty of room here for both of you, and we can help you when you need it. You won't have to call us for help. I don't expect you to give up your home. It's your decision what you want to do with it, and I don't want any payment. Please accept my offer. They sat there with wide eyes. I hadn't discussed it with Andy, so it was news to him too. After a few seconds, they both came over to me and hugged me. Well, we all had tears in our eyes as we said goodbye, and soon we had everything sorted out. Of course, we had to ask Donnie and Julia about our decision, but they were more than happy to share a room. So we began living together under one roof. My relationship with Julia improved, but there were still moments when anger surfaced in my mind. The turning point came when Julia was sitting on my lap, and I was looking at her. In my thoughts, she should be a child from me and my husband, not from my husband with another woman. As I began to feel the anger, I glanced out the window at my husband playing with our son in the backyard. I'm sure anyone could see how upset I was at that moment. But when I saw them laughing together, all the negative feelings dissipated and never returned. 5 months ago, we've been living together for the last 3 months. On good days, Michelle helped me with chores wherever she could, even when I told her it wasn't necessary. She just said it was the least she could do. On her difficult days, all of us, even Donnie, helped and supported her. You might think I'm foolish for inviting my husband's lover to live with us. I trusted Andy and Michelle, though I still felt the love between them. There were plenty of jokes among all of us, even with a hint of sexual innuendo, but I never felt like anything inappropriate was happening. Michelle and I became best friends over the last few months. We went shopping together or just strolled with the kids. No, we didn't have a bachelorette party, but we did go out for coffee a few times. Julie and I became good friends, and she often came to me to play or ask something. I just enjoy having her around. There was one instance when she was sitting on my lap, coloring a book. and I noticed some physical resemblance to Andy. Then I also realized she liked technical stuff, just like him. Suddenly, I felt anger towards Andy and looked out the window as he played with Donnie. But after a few seconds, I realized I saw some traits of bad in Donnie's face, and all the anger dissipated. Oh, about Andy and me? The first few weeks after our initial meeting, our relationship was challenging. Our counselor really helped, and we rediscovered our love and trust for each other. We discussed all our issues, and our relationship improved. Surprisingly, long conversations with Michelle and getting to know Julie helped our marriage. When Michelle and Julie moved in with us, we held back our affection in front of them. But Michelle immediately sensed it and told us not to hold back. She liked seeing us happy together. In her bad days, I often stayed with her in her room, and we even hugged. There was nothing sexual between us. I just comforted her and helped her throughout the day. Well, Andy sometimes peeked in, and knowing men, I think he would have been happy to catch us together in a sexual manner. I dare say he would have been glad to engage in a threesome with us, but that never happened. I saw how sad he was, especially on her bad days. He never lost affection for me when we were together, but sometimes I caught his thoughtful gaze on her bad days. I knew he really loved her, not as much as I had hoped, but still genuine love. Definitely more than I ever loved bad. That's when I made a sacrifice. I sat next to Andy and Michelle and addressed them. Michelle, Andy, I see love between you. I raised my hand as they began to say something. I know nothing happened, and I'm very grateful for that, but I also see how you look at each other and I see desire. Michelle, next week is your birthday, and I have a special gift for you. I pulled out an envelope from my pocket. These are 2 tickets for a weekend at a spa resort. It's about 120 miles away from here. Andy, I want you to take Michelle. You can leave Friday afternoon and come back Sunday afternoon. It's just 1 room, so I want you to know that whatever happens there is fine with me. But please, I never want to know about it. They both looked at me in surprise. After they composed themselves, they started speaking simultaneously. You can't possibly mean that, Michelle began, while Andy said, What are you talking about? I stopped him and continued. I love you both, and I know you love me. Michelle, you've become my best friend in a short time, and that's what I want for both of you. I also know there are still feelings between you two. I want you to spend some time together without any guilt. I have a feeling that you both need this for closure. I'm not asking you to engage in anything sexual, but if something happens, I don't want you to regret it. I know it's very unusual for a wife to send her husband on vacation with his former lover. We all need this to happen to put an end to it. Please, accept this. When I finished, tears were in my eyes. A few seconds later, they both got up and hugged me. For the next few days, nothing was said about my gift. But on Friday at noon, Andy and Michelle asked if I was sure about it. With all the certainty I could muster, I answered yes. They left early in the day and I watched them drive away. I wasn't sure if I did the right thing. Of course, Michelle couldn't steal my husband while waiting for her death. But what would it mean for our marriage? While during the day I was distracted by the children, the next 2 nights, lying alone in bed, I thought about Andy and Michelle and what they could be doing. At that moment, I also understood what Andy must have felt during my affair when he was alone, or with Michelle, and knew I was with Bud. On Sunday afternoon, I nervously waited for their return. When they pulled up, I was waiting in the kitchen, whatever was going to happen, but whatever I expected, when Michelle came up to me, hugged me, and simply said, "Thank you, I love you." I was just speechless. Then Andy walked into the house and left his luggage by the door. He came up to me, hugged me, and said, "I love you forever." These words from both of them just made me cry, and I felt a heavy burden lift from my shoulders. During dinner with the kids, we had a casual conversation. Michelle went to bed early, and even the kids went to bed early without much fuss. When Andy and I went to our bedroom, I didn't know what to do and let him take the lead. I didn't expect him to seduce and pamper me. He started kissing and undressing me. Then he laid me back on the bed and began massaging and caressing my entire body, which aroused me. We made love for a long time that night. When I woke up, I knew I had done the right thing and that everything would be okay. Less than 4 months ago, I expected the next few days to be awkward because I had been with Michelle, but they proved me wrong. Among us, there were still sexual innuendos, but any tension disappeared. Michelle and Andy were much more relaxed together and behaved like very good friends or even playful siblings. Nothing changed between Michelle and me, except that we felt even more connected. We had fun and sometimes teamed up against Andy just for laughs. Several weeks later, I missed my period. I just knew it happened after their joint weekend. Usually I would be happy to have a child with the man I love, and honestly, I was truly happy. But I was too afraid of what he would think. Would he think I was trying to trap him and tie him to me with a child? A home pregnancy test confirmed it, and that evening in the bedroom, we sat down to talk. Andy, I love you, and under normal circumstances, I would just be happy. I really don't know how this happened. Well, I know how, but not why, because I'm still taking the pills. He just looked at me bewildered. You have to believe me. I don't want you to get involved in anything, but I'm pregnant. With those words, I looked down at my hands and waited for his reaction. I have only one question. Do you love me and do you want to have children with me? I looked into his eyes and said with all sincerity, the answer to both questions is, with all my heart. He came over and hugged me. Then we should celebrate because I love you and would be happy to have children with you too. We had a great night, but in the morning, as I was lost in my thoughts, he asked me what was wrong. I simply replied, Michelle, I know she still loves you and I don't want to hurt her. I just don't know how she'll react. He responded, You're right, but there's no point in keeping it a secret. We'll tell her together tonight. But somehow Michelle already knew. She looked at me strangely several times during the day. During the day, she asked me, Susan, you're pregnant, aren't you? Surprised, I looked at her and said, Yes, I'm sorry. Andy and I were going to tell you together tonight. It wasn't planned. She looked at my face for a few seconds. Oh my God, you thought I would take it badly. You thought I might get angry. She came over and hugged me. I'm so happy for you. I love you both, and I know you love each other. She touched my belly and continued, These children are symbols of your love, and I'm glad that Donnie and Julie will have siblings. About 2 months ago, after the news of my pregnancy, all our families were happy. I wasn't showing yet, but Andy, the kids, and Michelle regularly wanted to touch my belly to see who would feel my babies first. Yes, the ultrasound confirmed twins. Later she told me that after the weekend spent with my husband, she dreamt that we would have twins. Michelle's health started deteriorating. She had to spend more time in bed and take naps several times during the day. Then one day she sat with us and her lawyer. Andy, Susan, I don't have much time left. I just know it. It's time to settle my affairs with my estate. Initially, I wanted them to go into a trust fund for Julie. Of course, I thought. It's her money, and Julie would be the logical heir. But you not only accepted Julie into your family as I hoped, but you also accepted me. You've helped me in the past few months in ways I never expected, especially from you, Susan. That's why I'm forever grateful. That's why I'm changing my will. We looked at her in surprise. Andy, Susan, I want you to have my house. It's larger than yours, and you'll need the extra space for your newborns. At the moment, the design is still as my husband and I envisioned it from the beginning, and it still holds many memories of him. You'll have enough money left to remodel it as you wish. I no longer need a memorial. Soon I'll be with the love of my life. There should also be enough money to create funds for all your children, not just Julie. With this last statement, we both looked even more surprised. For the past year, I've had the honor of being part of this family, and that's why I believe it's necessary to treat everyone equally. I've watched you with both children, especially you, Susan. I've seen how you wholeheartedly accepted her after our conversation in the beginning. And you, Andy, I know your relationship with Donnie has always been a bit strained. But over the past few months, they've improved for the better. Please accept my gift. We sat in silence and awe before heading upstairs for group hugs with Michelle. The lawyer had prepared all the documents for us to sign, especially regarding Julie. After Michelle's passing, no one wanted to deal with the paperwork and discuss issues related to the children's welfare. Afterward, Michelle spoke to Julie. She, of course, knew her mother was sick, but at 5 years old, she didn't fully understand what that really meant. After a while, Julie came up to me and said, "Aunt Susan, Mommy told me that you're going to be my mommy now. Do I need to call you Mommy too?" With tears in my eyes, I pulled her onto my lap and said, "Julie, your mommy will always be your mommy. Unfortunately, God wants her to be in heaven sooner rather than later. But even when she's no longer with us, I always want you to remember her as your mommy, and I want you to always keep her in your heart. She's a wonderful woman, a great friend to Uncle Andy and me. And looking at you, I see that she was a great mom to you too. It's a great honor for me that your mom asked me to take on the role of your mommy in the future. But I don't want to replace her in your heart. I'd gladly stand beside her, and it's up to you how you want to call me." With these words, we sat together for half an hour, silently crying together. Sometime later, I saw her talking to Andy in the backyard. I never asked, but from what I saw, that was heartbreaking too. There are 3 photographs that we will keep on Julie's bedside table. One of her beautiful mother, one of Julie with her mother, and one of Michelle between Andy and me, with Donnie and Julie in front of us. Today, over the past 2 months, Michelle has been rapidly fading. Her doctors were surprised that she remained alive for so long, but we concluded that our love helped her hold on. In the end, her body succumbed to cancer. It was heartbreaking to see the once beautiful woman suffering from illness. We kept her at home with us all the time and enlisted the help of hospice care. Her home became our home. Andy and I lived in one of the guest rooms, while Michelle occupied her master bedroom. Last week, she rarely regained consciousness. Either Andy or I were always by her side. The kids often stayed with us as we sat with her. In her final hour, she regained consciousness. The 4 of us were all there, Andy and I holding each other's hands, Julie lying next to Michelle quietly crying, and Donnie leaning against her bed. Michelle looked at each of us and softly said, "Andy and Susan, I love you both. Please don't let anyone come between you again. Donnie, I'm not your mother, but I would have been happy if someone like you were my son. Julie, I'm proud of you, and I know you'll grow up to be a wonderful woman. I know Andy and Susan will be good parents to you. I love you all. Don't grieve too much. I'll be in my husband's arms soon." With these words, she closed her eyes and took her last breath. We all remained there, immersed in our grief. We buried her next to her husband. We never knew him, but he must have been a wonderful person to Michelle. On her gravestone, we wrote, "Michelle, a great friend and wonderful mother, reunited with the love of her life." That's why we're standing here. The funeral is officially over, but the 4 of us are still standing in front of her grave with all the flowers. Yesterday, I asked Andy and Julie if it would be okay for them if we named one of my twins Michelle, if it's a girl, or Michael, if it's a boy, in honor of Michelle. They all agreed with my decision.